Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by BeaversEdge writer and KGO radio host TJ Mathewson, also joined by recruiting analyst Dylan Callaghan-Croley here for BeaversEdge.com. We're coming to you guys with an emergency Edge podcast. Dylan, TJ, and I, we cleared our Saturday schedules with the news of Oregon State head coach Jonathan Smith departing from Michigan State. Had to talk to you guys and break it all down because quite a bit's happened. TJ, just since you and I saw each other at Autzen Stadium last night, a lot's happened since Jonathan Smith spoke to the media last night. No decisions had been made. As it turned out, that was a bold-faced lie, but we'll get into that later. And, for the most part, what a whirlwind week. I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts. We're going to be breaking it all down. And obviously, there's a lot to unpack as far as what Oregon State's future is, who their next head coach is going to be, what players could be potentially entering the portal. And it is a uneasy time for Oregon State right now, and it's definitely going to be an interesting time ahead. Welcome to the pod, guys. How's it going?
I'll say, Brenden, I had a little bit more of an optimistic view about the future of Oregon State athletics before the Washington week. But I would say this decision and how it's played out and just kind of the weirdness that Jonathan went around trying to be transparent, not really, and just left a bad taste in a lot of fans' mouth and eventually makes the decision official here today on Saturday. Man, it just feels a lot less optimistic, I'll say. I mean, you thought that you'd have enough stability throughout to maybe weather the storm of what's coming ahead in the next couple of years. It seems quite a bit less certain now. And I'll say, man, just what a weird atmosphere at Autzen Stadium last night. I mean,
oh my gosh,
not even getting to focus on the game, really.
It was so weird.
The game wasn't competitive, but
no, it was terrible.
We're sitting there in the press box and no one's talking about the game. I mean, You and I didn't have a conversation about the game. We were talking about
it was insane.
What seemed like what was going to eventually happen. And, people had a sick feeling in their stomach when Jonathan got asked multiple times this week about this job and did not give a straight answer to it. And you could kind of feel, based on some of the wording, some of the decisions, that this was going to be. And now it sucks for everybody. And the Beavers have 96 what's the right math on there? 96 hours to get somebody. You need to hire somebody fast. Now the portal opens a week from Monday. You got to keep these players on your roster, and it's just a mess. And my heart goes out to Beaver fans. I mean, hosting the call-in show last night, the post-game show, some people they were going through it a little bit. There was a lot of frustration of the team on the field and the decisions of the head football coach. And, now here we are.
Yeah, and Dylan, obviously, your thoughts too. Keeping track of this from afar. Obviously, you've been connected in, and really, more so than anybody else here in the Oregon State kind of media community. And give ourselves a little pat on the back here at Rivals, because Dylan was involved with Michigan State Rivals and had this, nuggets kind of percolating for the better part of couple weeks, maybe a month. And when you first mentioned it to me couple months back after, Mel Tucker was fired unceremoniously, I very much dismissed it because and as I sit here now, fellas, I suppose the almighty dollar speaks, but there was not a world, even last night, where I could tell myself that I would have thought Jonathan Smith, this would be the job that Jonathan Smith would goes to UCLA. I have no problem with that. But going to this job at this time, after this season, fellas, it feels like the Beavers took a punch from Mike Tyson, managed to not get knocked out, got up, and then, Floyd Mayweather was waiting for him.
Sorry, I just got a text about personnel stuff for Oregon State, which we could talk about a little bit here afterwards. Don't want to share it on the pod just yet, but
Dylan with the exclusive scope, folks. Make sure to be at BeaversEdge.com.
No, yeah, you said it. We kind of, brought this up about a month ago, and you and everybody else was kind of dismissive of it, which is understandable because I'm sitting here today. I think for Michigan State, as an outsider, Jonathan Smith is a great hire for Michigan State. He's a hell of a coach. There's no doubt about that. What he did at Oregon State is amazing. But again, just a lack of connections in the Midwest. He hasn't coached further east than Montana.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's very interesting of why Michigan State went this way. Maybe it's just for the ability to build a program, to be not to be mean, but to be because Michigan State's the little brother in Michigan. I
Right.
mean, Michigan just won their third straight Big
Right.
Ten East championship moments before we got on. Maybe it's because of that. Maybe because it's that he doesn't need to recruit at an elite level to develop a good team. He's a great player developer. I don't see the fit necessarily, but it is what it is from that angle. But yeah, we've been on top of this from day one, really. That his name got brought up with the Spartans. But yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. DJ put it really well, and so did you. It's just I feel terribly for the players, the
Yeah.
fans, the entire athletic department. I mean, Jonathan was supposed to be kind of that little bit of stability that the program and the university did have in the athletics. And through it all, he was going to be, that guiding light, the one that helped get them through it and keep the program building. And now with him gone, it's like it was your biggest believer, and suddenly he's now elsewhere. And yeah, UCLA would have made sense. He was a hometown boy going back to Southern California. That makes sense. Go
That's
out
his
east.
that's his recruiting area
Exactly.
too. I mean,
Yeah,
that's his MO.
exactly. Now, from a recruiting standpoint, I mean, can't really beat around the bush here. It's not going to probably be good for Oregon State. I mean, we already saw one decommitment today out of Andrew Brinson. I texted a little bit of a couple other recruits, and right now it's early on. We're gonna consider all our options, look at what happens, and go from there. But yeah, I mean, Oregon State doesn't have much time, like TJ said. I mean, transfer portal opens in a week. I don't know if they're going to have a hire in the week, but I mean, within a week and a half, 2 weeks tops, there has to be a hire because you have to get involved in the transfer portal rather early. You only have a month there till
Right.
it closes in early January, and then early signing day is in 25 days. And I know you're not going to sign a full class by the early signing period, but there's guys that you're going to want to keep as part of this class. And yeah, Beavers have to move fast. A lot of urgency here.
And you know what's else is interesting, fellas, is what nobody's talking about today? In 3 weeks, they have to play a bowl game. That
Yeah.
really means absolutely nothing now in the grand scheme of things. Maybe not absolutely nothing. I shouldn't say that, but is that even a priority right now, TJ? I mean,
Yeah, well, who's playing in the bowl game is my
right.
question. Like,
So, I
which
mean,
players are still going to be around to play in
so
it?
like last night, you're talking to DJ, you're talking to Anthony, there's rumors that Oregon State's finally going to get invited to the Holiday Bowl for the first time. It's most likely going to be not most likely, looking like it's going to be a potential Oregon State Clemson matchup. Those storylines would write themselves. DJ versus Dabo, the, kind of two, powers colliding, so to speak. And both DJ and Anthony Gould last night were like, yeah, we plan to, right? I mean, it was something they were pretty excited about. And then now you flash forward to today, and it's all about, like you guys were saying, hiring a coach within I think you have a week. It is Saturday. I think by next Saturday, you have to have someone hired because that would still give you 48 hours to, I think back to how, this is just a very near example, recency, but when Jimmy Lake got fired up at Washington, the Huskies had a ton of dudes enter the portal. Most notably, Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, or Jalen McMillan, one of the two. Can't remember. And Kalen DeBoer comes in with Ryan Grubb and has to sit down and says, we need you guys to stay. They get him to stay and, so on and so forth. So that's not to say that a new head coach can't come in and get guys to stay. So I think that's certainly, you can't look at it from a true doom and gloom point there. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about some of the guys coming up, but Damian Martinez has been public on social media today that, again, as of now, Thursday, November 25th at 1:30 p.m. He's not interested in going to Michigan State. TJ, we'll see if that, holds up ultimately. Again, we found out the almighty dollar talks. So we'll see as that kind of comes to be. But that obviously would be a great starting point as Damian Martinez is one of your most sought after kind of sophomores, juniors to be, so to speak. But kind of last thing on Smith before we kind of transition, start talking about the candidates, and then obviously talking about some guys that could be eligible for leaving. And then we'll talk to Dylan about the recruiting class and who else could maybe be, potentially looking to weigh their options. With the way that this all came down and the way that you guys have kind of seen how it's unfolded on social media, how much is Jonathan Smith's legacy tarnished at Oregon State?
His legacy is tarnished. I would say to me, though, there are people who understand why he did what he did. Looking out for himself.
Sure.
Like what college sports has become is really just looking out for yourself. In the portal, name, image, and likeness, coaches moving all around, conferences and teams and programs
Sure.
moving all around. I mean, it's looking out for yourself. And all Jonathan did was look out for himself. Nothing around him was his fault of the Beavers conference situation, the Beavers athletic budget for next season, the lack of a TV deal. None of that is his fault. So to hold the circumstances around Jonathan Smith and then blame him, I think is wrong. I think is absolutely wrong. And I think there are plenty of Beaver fans who acknowledge that this is what Jonathan Smith had to do and that his contract at Michigan State is in a conference that gets paid a significant amount of money with a significantly higher assistant pool for paying your assistants and all these other things that check the boxes that cannot be guaranteed at Oregon State. It cannot be guaranteed at Oregon State. Jonathan Smith is still climbing the ladder of where he wants to be in his coaching career. I mean, he's not at the top yet. Beaver fans really do love what he's done here at Oregon State, but he has not reached the top yet. And he feels like going to Michigan State can jump up another step on that ladder. There will be some, though, who have tarnished his legacy that will think so. I'm sure we'll hear from a lot of them here over the course of this week of traitor, where's the loyalty, yada, 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 yada. It probably depends on the person, Brenden. I believe you're one of those people. I wouldn't quite be one of those people because there are so many circumstances around this situation that I think are unfair to pin on Jonathan Smith for doing what everyone else in college football seemingly except these two schools that are left in the Pac-2 which have done, which is look out for yourself.
Sure. And I think on to that point, for sure. I mean, as someone who was a student at Oregon State University and remembers leaving class early in a dreary November day in 2017 to watch Jonathan Smith's introductory press conference and have Jonathan Smith stand at that podium and say, this is my dream job. This is my dream school. I'm home. And I think Oregon State fans probably felt that they had him lock under key with the exception of maybe just a few jobs. I mean, again, we don't even know, right? None of us got into the mind of Jonathan Smith. We all assumed that UCLA was like one of those jobs because it was Southern California. He goes home. Who knows? Maybe going back to Southern California is not what he wants to do at all. Maybe he's like Michigan, East Lansing's like Corvallis, and there could be something to it there. The problem that I have with his legacy is that knowing what we know now, it had a huge impact on last night, and not being able to handle your business better than he handled it this week, I think it was slightly unprofessional. I think it was Jonathan's lack of media savvy kind of coming out a little bit, not knowing what to say. And it just came across as like awkward and 1 foot in, 1 foot out the door. And I just, I think kind of speaking for some Beaver fans, like going back to my point earlier, like they just would feel like, how could Jonathan Smith deliver the knockout blow? Like the conference did all this, and then now Jonathan Smith's like, see you guys. I mean, I that part of it, but your part is fair too. So I see both sides of it. And it's like, on one token, you're absolutely right. The opportunities, the resources, it's unmatched. But at the same token, Jonathan Smith, I'm going to run this analogy into the ground until someone tells me not to. Very much like Damian Lillard. Loyalty, 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 loyalty. Only until he wants to move on to a new situation. So, maybe it's one of those things, TJ, like you said, where it has become a selfish business. You are looking out for nobody but yourself. And, if that's the case, then it's a dog eat dog world, I guess, in the college football. And Oregon State fans for what? Have to toughen up, for lack of better terms?
You can easily blame the NCAA for this as well. They're the ones responsible for this calendar that all college football programs have to operate under, where if you're going to hire a head coach, it has to be like this weekend. Right. It has to be, if you're going to hire a head coach, even if he has another job elsewhere. I mean, you have to interview them during the season. There is no time after the season for them to sit down and say, okay, let me just complete my year first, and then I will go look for new jobs. Like, no, that's not an option.
Right. And, Dylan, from your perspective, obviously not being here and being, kind of outside of the bubble and the periphery that TJ and I are in, I'm just curious because you've been with us for a couple years now and you've seen, Jonathan Smith take, I believe when you came in, what was, a 7-win team and improve it and get better each and every year. Obviously you're not here and don't live it like, those who have, right now I'm speaking to those Beaver fans who watched Jonathan Smith as a player, right, 20-some years ago, take him to the Fiesta Bowl, him come back and then start to have success. And, I mean, fellas, just talking to some Oregon State fans both last week at Reser Stadium after the Husky game and then this last week at Autzen Stadium, he was the type of person, guys, that, Oregon State referred to – he was their golden boy, for lack of better terms. And it wasn't a stretch to think Oregon State would build a statue of that guy. That's how much he was beloved in Corvallis. And I think that absoluteness and then the way it was handled, I think it's a lot of raw emotion right now, but just from everything that I've seen this morning, and I've seen a lot, there are some Beaver fans who are definitely pretty fired up. Dylan, I'm just curious what your perspective is, from the national side. And obviously you covered, what the hire you think it is for Michigan State and how the fit isn't maybe perfect, but just purely from, Oregon State's perspective, how do you think Jonathan Smith will be remembered 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line in Oregon State lore?
I think it depends on the success of this next head coach. Yeah. I think if we're sitting here in 5-10 years and Oregon State is wherever they may be in the college football world, if they're one of the top programs in that tier, that wherever they land, I think he's looked as a guy, who set the foundation for Oregon State to become that next level program, which I still think there is that ability. And for all the uncertainties that surround this program, from an outside perspective, I also see as, they're going to probably end up in some type of weird mix of Mountain West, them, and Washington State, whatever it may be. But there's that opportunity that they can become the premier program of that conference and, have great success for a long time. And I think there is that. I think that could draw in some coaches. Yes, the uncertainty is surely something that will hurt them in this coaching search, but I still think there's that possibility. If it all goes well, he's somebody who set that foundation. If it goes poorly, people are going to look back on it, very negatively. They're going to, say it could have been something great, but him leaving the way he did and that entire process stunted the growth of the program and set the program back to where it was, before he came to Corvallis or came back to Corvallis.
I'll say this, Dylan, you're on the right track. I don't think there could be enough damage done this offseason to be as bad as it was when Jonathan arrived. And that's fair. That's fair. That's where coming full circle and back to TJ's point, TJ, where I'm saying I see both sides of this. I have the frustration of him leaving because of there are numerous reasons in my head where I can't understand it, right? And that's fine. Yeah. But at the same token, I also have, reasons flipped. And it's like you also have to objectively look and go, Oregon State outside of Kansas was the worst Power 5 job in America in 2017. It was pitiful what Gary Anderson left behind. Again, no disrespect to the guys that were on that squad, but it was like Isaiah Hodgins and a whole bunch of dudes. Right. So, it's, that part and the fact that Jonathan Smith, other than when Mike Riley, his first tenure, pulled Oregon State out of, the pits when they had 20. Oh gosh, I get this dropped every time. Either 26.
29.
Yeah, 29 straight years of losing. Thank you, TJ. I
Yeah.
always seem to forget. But hey, in my defense, it was before I was born. So, fair to fair. But, when Mike Riley did to pull them out of it, I mean, you fellas,
Sure.
you think about that now, almost 30 years of losing seasons. Like, that is unbelievable to think about. And that's where you have to realize that, like, historically, Oregon State has not been a great football program. They don't necessarily have the football legacy outside of, the modern era, which I like to say 2000s on, and, some glory years in the 60s, the giant killer years, all that. But 70s to 90s was pretty rough. And, I think even if worst case scenario happens, and we mentioned earlier in the podcast that we think right now, and all indications are that Damian Martinez will come back. And I think that's a huge jumping off point, because I do think that in this case, outside of maybe a few select guys, this could be if one stays, a lot stay. And now, granted, do I think that someone like Aiden Childs, who came to Oregon State for Jonathan Smith and no other reason than Jonathan Smith, if his family can tolerate commuting to Michigan, that would be one that I'd be concerned about right off the bat. And, we haven't seen much from Aiden Childs other than an emoji on social media with the glasses so far this morning. So read into that what you will. But I think he's kind of one of the bigger names, since Damian Martinez appears to be kind of shutting that down on social media, so to speak. There's obviously opportunities elsewhere. There could be, guys on defense, someone like Easton Mascarenas could maybe be in that mix too, or anybody. It's completely just foolhardy to throw out names, because you don't know how many guys Jonathan could look to take. Could it be a Dion situation, guys, where he walks into Michigan State, it's like, I don't want any of you, and tries to bring over almost all of his Oregon State team? So, that part of it is, I think still kind of to be had, so to speak. But overall, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the player movement now happens. Obviously, not much will change before the portal. Guys might have decisions in their head, but they obviously can't announce until the portal opens. More in the interim, Dylan, over to you.
Yeah.
Andrew Brinson was the first to decommit today. Right now, give me an over-under. If you were to predict just before they hire their next head coach, how many more commitments they could lose? Give me a number.
So are we counting Brinson in this
Yeah,
over-under?
we'll count Brinson. Yeah.
All right. So they had 15 commitments for Brinson. I'll say over-under 4.5. I think 5 is probably a solid guess. I think they're going to be able to keep a couple of these guys. But I think they'll definitely lose some. I think the guys who are a little further away from campus are going to probably reconsider their options. But like, it's hard because like a Brandon Tullis, a Mekhi Frazier, I think that's all comes down to who's the RB coach in a couple of weeks.
Sure.
If Keith,
that's a good point.
If Keith stays around, there's very few running backs coaches who are better that they had offers from that they could go to. Brinson, you look at Brinson, it sucks to say for Oregon State, but he had plenty of good offers on his offer sheet, and I'm sure he'll pick some up. And I know he has interest in going to Michigan State to follow Smith if possible. So we'll see if that happens. But I think 4.5. We'll say 4.5 for the over under.
The name that I'm curious if you feel the same way, Dylan, the name that I'm keeping an eye on, because we've, again, a lot of rumors at this point, nothing absolutely, truth. But, if we've seen reports that Jonathan will try to take some of his, assistants with him. And if I were to, guess at this point that, Jim Mahalchek would be in that mix, Brian Wozniak would be in that mix. Trent Bray, we'll get to him, and the coaching candidate shortly would be in that mix, amongst others. I mean, I think about like Blue Adams and Anthony Perkins, who have done a great job in that secondary, and they're obviously a part of it too. But,
it is. It is worth knowing that I believe it has been reported by our sister site, Spartans Illustrated, or another Michigan State source, that Harlan Barnett is likely to be retained by Jonathan, which he was the secondary coach for the Spartans before becoming
Okay.
the interim head coach there. So
interesting. Okay. So that's an interesting part with Blue and Anthony Perkins to an extent.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm curious. The one name that I would watch right away, Dylan, to put in that mix, Peyton Stewart. And why?
Yeah.
Because, well, he strikes me as someone who is a very much Mahalchek guy. And coincidentally, folks, you'll remember Peyton Stewart wanted to play in the Big Ten and was committed to Northwestern before their disaster. Peyton Stewart was probably, I think Oregon State's offensive line class this year is very deep. But I think he had a case to be arguably, the highest ceiling of anybody with, his size and height and everything. And, he's a guy that right away came to mind as someone who could be watching out. But we'll obviously, be looking into it. Again, make sure to stay locked to Dylan and I at BeaversEdge.com, as we'll be, keeping a good pulse on the recruits. Dylan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the offensive line recruits, especially as a whole, are probably ones that we'll be watching closely. Because if he does leave for Michigan State or another job, that I think it's going to be hard to retain those, especially somebody like Rustin Young, who already picked up offers from like Auburn recently. That could be somebody I can easily see Smith and Michalczyk, if he goes to Michigan State, trying to take over Young, one of the top very well could be one of the top offensive linemen in the country in this next update. But somebody who's really, from what I've heard, grab the attention of staffs across the country this fall down there in Hawaii too. So
interesting.
That would be rough for sure.
Yeah, like I said, I think again, we wrote about it in our V1 of our coaching hot board that's live at BeaversEdge.com. You can check out that story. We got an awesome deal going right now. You can get full year subscription, 75% off for first-time subscribers. It's a great deal, getting Rivals for an entire year for that much of a discount, and then you get to read all of our stuff as we preview and look at all these, this coaching search and everything that goes with it. And Dylan, like I said, top to bottom, there will be staff changes on this team. There will be new faces brought in, obviously a new head coach. We'll go ahead and wrap up the pod. Again, thanks to everyone for tuning into this emergency edition of the Edge podcast. Brenden Slaughter joined by TJ Mathewson and Dylan Callaghan-Croley. Let's talk a little bit about and tease some of those names on that coaching hot board. Dylan, you and I have been hard at work since the wee hours this morning, getting names together and ultimately drafting our first version of the hot board. Some intriguing names and some guys that just from my perspective, I'd be very excited if Oregon State could land. Let's go ahead and we're going to talk about a couple of them. Again, make sure to check out the full list at BeaversEdge.com. Let's go ahead and start with the one that I think is at the top of everybody's mind. And the one for me right now, it is a no-brainer. You offer it to him and you don't interview. Well, I think there are laws around that. I was going to say you don't interview anybody else, but I think you have to interview, a certain number of candidates, so to speak, for a position, leave it open for all that, all the hiring processes. Yeah. But I think if Trent Bray wants the job, the conversation stops and finishes there. I think, he's our number one candidate on the Beavers Edge board because I think he's got the charisma and the, energy and the personality to be a very good and effective head coach, and especially a defensive-minded one. I think the challenge would appeal to him. I think he, Trent Bray's like someone like, he's, TJ seen at practice. He's like, hey, I'm going to run faster than my players. I'm a little crazy. Like Trent Bray is, he's a little like intense. And I mean that in the very best way. And I think he could certainly handle the duties of being a head coach. And given that he's an alumni, bona fide alumni with, I'm pretty sure Trent Bray is still one of the, if not the all-time leading linebacker tackler, right there near the top. His dad was, Oregon State's defensive coordinator when they went on their miracle runs under, not miracle, but sensational runs under Dennis Erickson in 2000. And, he has deep ties to the university. And perhaps most importantly, TJ and Dylan, I'm curious because I can't remember if you were super in the loop with us last year when this was all coming down. But TJ, you know where I'm going with this. Last year, when we talked to Trent Bray, shortly after he got his contract extension from Oregon State, when he was starting to get, interest from others, and Trent Bray said, money does not motivate me. It does not motivate me. I love Corvallis. And to be perfectly honest, given that we never heard Jonathan say money doesn't motivate him, maybe that's the ace in Oregon State's hole here. TJ is to, and I think I was telling you this last night, like best case scenario. I mean, it could work the other way. Trent Bray is not obviously a head coach, but best case scenario, hasn't been a head coach before. Best case scenario, you're Utah, and Jonathan Smith is your Urban Meyer, and Trent Bray is your Kyle Whittingham.
Yeah, so that could be it. When Trent says money doesn't matter, I'd like to see that scenario play out where he is not a candidate to be a head coach. He has the option between staying in Corvallis for $825,000, which is his current salary, or he could probably get offered, if Jonathan really wants him, up to $2 million at Michigan State.
Like, and he would make more. He would make more than that as a head coach at Oregon State, though.
I know he would, but like, let's just like put it flat out, like if money doesn't matter, because if he's head coach at Oregon State, you're right, he would get paid more money. In which case, does the money matter? Yeah, because he's making more money. Sure, he's got more to do, but I would say the money matters in that case. Yeah, I think this is a slam dunk. I mean, he's very football focused. I remember asking him about, like, he's been asked like what other things he does, and he's like, pretty much just like focus on football like all the time. And that's what he'd get to do here at Oregon State. I think it would have the best shot of keeping some of these guys, especially on the defensive side of the football, here in Corvallis. And, it comes right off the Jonathan tree of hiring an alum and saying you loved playing here. You loved you love coaching here. You love Corvallis, and hopefully with all the uncertainty that's going on out there, that you would want to stay here regardless because you care about this place that much. So I think that's a slam dunk. The money would have to work out. You'd probably have to get him over $3 million to really make a difference
which is still 2.5 less than John, or two-ish. I think Jonathan's about 5. Dylan, real quick, just from your perspective, being the outside looking at Trent Bray, do you think he's worth the risk as far as a coordinator who's never been a head coach, simply for the fact that TJ mentioned, I don't think anybody on this list could help you stop the bleeding more so than Bray, and you really could kind of coast and probably have minimal deflections. You don't know how he's going to be as a head coach, but you probably would keep the gang together, for lack of better terms.
No, yeah, and I think that's the big part here. It would probably be the best chance at stopping the bleeding. Like you said, it would be the best chance to keep the majority of the roster together, especially the defensive side of the ball, which, defense wins championships. As long as Oregon State can have a great defense, the offense can be a little bit of a work in progress. Now, you don't want it to be Iowa per se, but as long as the offense can have some sort of life beat, you have a chance. Yeah, I think Bray would be it wouldn't be maybe the sexiest of hires per se, but it would be a hire that, like you said, can keep the continuity within the program. It can help stop that bleeding, and I think it could also help keep most of the staff together. You're probably still going to lose some guys to Michigan State, but I think you'd be able to retain a large chunk of those guys as well. But I mean, the whole first time head coach stint, I don't think should be necessarily too big of a factor here. Do you want somebody with head coaching experience? Sure. But some of the guys we have on our list, some of the more exciting names, would be first-time head coaches. We don't want to go through all of them, but again, a name that we have on there, which I don't think he gets the job, but is an exciting name, would be Brendan Marion, the offense coordinator at UNLV. Not a guy, he's a fast-rising coach, going to be a head coach, if not this offseason, next offseason. But if you're Oregon State, maybe that's a hire you go to because he brings, an exciting offense. He brings a new era, a new breath almost to the program. It kind of freshens things up a little bit, but you're going to risk losing some players. You're going to risk losing staffers. So it is tough, but I think Bray would be a fine hire, even if it's not, maybe the biggest hire in the world for Oregon State out of the list that we made.
And again, make sure to check out that list at BeaversEdge.com. That'll go ahead and wrap up this edition of the Edge podcast. Big thanks to Dylan Callaghan-Croley and TJ Mathewson for jumping on. Again, that whole list is available at BeaversEdge.com. We gave in-depth breakdowns on each candidate, so make sure to check that out. Thanks for watching.